Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Fool for You by Katee Robert, narrated by Estrella. Chapter 1. Hope Moore held her breath as she passed the sign declaring, "Welcome to Devil's Falls." She hadn't crossed the town boundary in 13 years, not since she sat next to an open grave as they lowered her brother into the ground. Not since she'd turned her back on her entire life here, whisked away by her parents to the best medical facilities Texas had to offer. She'd touched her knee. She'd never cheered again, never run track, never done any of the things she'd planned when she was 18 and had graduated high school with stars in her eyes. Stars in her eyes and love in her heart. Neither had lasted past that car crash. Oh, it had taken the love a lot longer to die than it had her knee, but Daniel Rodriguez made sure she knew where she stood with him. She caught herself taking her foot off the gas and picked up speed again. There was no telling if she'd see him while she was here, but it couldn't matter. She'd moved past what happened that night, moved past the disappointment that she'd almost let sour everything else about her life. It might not have happened like she planned, but she'd made the best of her college experience, and she'd gone on to create a successful little niche for herself, helping people and institutions with too much money on their hands create trusts and scholarships for those in need. And now Hope was back in town to finally do that in her brother's memory. She pulled onto Main Street, heading for the only lodging someone out of town with no relatives to stay with would consider, Sarah Jane's B&B. It was a nice little place, but Sarah Jane was nosy to a criminal degree and gossiped more than anyone Hope had ever come across. The second she checked in and went up to her room, everyone with a phone would be getting a call letting them know that she was back in town. It wasn't that it was a secret, but she couldn't help but feel that she'd always be John Moore's little sister, the one who survived when her older brother, her better in a lot of ways, didn't. She knew that was her own insecurity. She'd had too many years of therapy to believe anything else, except in her darkest heart of hearts, the place she didn't let see the light any more than strictly necessary. But it was hard to ignore that little voice when driving through Devil's Falls. No, not through. To. This was her destination. Her parents hadn't been too thrilled about her coming back, even for a limited time, but even they couldn't deny that this scholarship she was here to set up was a good thing, the right way to honor John. He'd been in the middle of a full ride at the University of Texas when he was killed, and it made sense to set it up to allow other kids the opportunity he'd never be able to realize. She pressed a hand to her chest and pulled into the nearest parking spot against the curb. God, even after all this time, it still hurts. Most days it didn't. He'd been gone long enough that she'd processed her grief as much as one person could process grief, and she was able to focus on the good memories. Most days. Her eyes focused on the sign she'd been staring blindly at, and she frowned. Cups and kittens. That was new. In a town as mired in the past as Devil's Falls, change was something of a novelty. Or maybe she was biased in a negative way, because the only thing this town held for her was memories. Some bad, mostly good. All dust now. Pathetically grateful for something external to focus on, she climbed out of her car and looked at the cheery window painting depicting kittens frolicking in between flowers. The B&B could wait a little while longer. Her meeting with the town board wasn't until tomorrow, so there was no reason she couldn't do a little poking around in the meantime. 13 years was a long time. If anyone had asked her, she would have joked that she hadn't expected anything about Devil's Falls to change while she was gone. Apparently, she'd been wrong. She pushed through the door and froze in the face of a pair of cats staring at her from their perch on a table overlooking the big window in the front. The sight surprised a laugh out of her. Cups and kittens, indeed. In the most literal sense. She glanced over at the woman behind the counter, a third cat lounging near the register. Familiarity rolled over Hope. Jules Rodriguez. Daniel's little cousin. Not so little anymore. Last time she'd seen Jules, the girl had been lanky to an almost awkward degree and had braces with bright green bands. She'd grown up pretty, and there was more of Daniel about her now than there had been when she was a kid. Or maybe I'm just back in Devil's Falls and seeing Daniel wherever I look. Jules's dark eyes cleared. Hope? What are you doing back in town? She hesitated. I don't suppose you're here to sweep my brooding cousin off his feet and shove him back into real life? Her mind tripped over itself trying to keep up with the other woman's verbal gymnastics. Jules had always been like that, now that she thought about it. A bright and bubbly steamroller. She tried to weed her way through what the woman had just said, but there was only one thing she could focus on. Daniel. Always Daniel. What do you mean, back into real life? Well, you know. No, she really didn't. She studied Jules's face, the way she wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Is he okay? She hadn't missed the way Quinn Baldwin had frozen up when she'd asked that same question a few weeks ago at his sister's wedding, and worry had been simmering in the back of her mind ever since, no matter how many times she told herself it wasn't any of her business. Daniel was a grown man, and he had always been more than capable of taking care of himself, and everyone else around him. Things changed, but she couldn't see that changing. Jules shifted, her hand darting out to pet the calico on the counter, and then darting away when the cat swiped at her. Define okay. It was none of her business. It stopped being her business a very long time ago. But that didn't stop her from clearing her throat and asking, Is he married? Did he build the house we always talked about and have those 2 wild boys and 1 sweet girl? Does he bring his wife waffles for breakfast in bed on the weekends? Oh my God, stop! But Jules was already shaking her head, her mouth turning down. Nope. No wife, no kids, no serious relationship in, 13 years. Hope blinked. You're joking. I wish I was. A calculating look came into her eyes, but then she shook herself, and it was all guileless enthusiasm. What are you doing for dinner? She rushed on without waiting for a response. We're having a little thing with Quinn and my friend Aubrey, and, well, I kinda went and married Adam Myers. Some things really do change. She remembered Adam, the wild-eyed boy who'd grown into a wild-eyed man, better than she remembered Jules. No one had expected him to come back to Devil's Falls after he blew out of town that last time, let alone to settle here and get married. Wow. What's Daniel have to say about that? He was the best man at our wedding. Jules laughed, though he was pretty furious at the beginning. Here, sit down. You look like you could use a coffee, and I'll tell you the story since we're generally pretty dead Thursday nights. Then I'll close up and we can go to dinner. The boys will love to see you. Quinn was just talking about you the other day. Hope wasn't sure she actually agreed to any of it, but the next thing she knew, she was drinking coffee while a cat curled up in her lap and listening to Jules's wild tale about a fake relationship that turned into a real relationship. Somehow, in the middle of that, she was bundled up into Jules's truck, and by then it was too late to change her mind. She settled into her seat, consoling herself with the fact that Jules had very specifically not mentioned Daniel's name. There was no reason to think he'd be there, but it would be nice to reconnect with some of her old friends. As much as it had hurt when things went south with Daniel, knowing that she'd lost Quinn and Adam too had just been salt in the wound. She'd chased them around since she could toddle after her big brother and his friends, and they'd turned into true friends over the years. She understood why they hadn't reached out, but she wasn't going to turn down a chance to catch up with them. It would probably be the only nice thing about being back in Devil's Falls. Not interested. You haven't even heard what I'm asking. Don't need to. Daniel Rodriguez leaned down and unbuckled Rita's saddle and hefted it off the horse's back. They'd had a good run today, the hot sun making it impossible to think too hard about anything other than whether a human being could roast alive in Texas in August. He hadn't yet, so that put the odds ever so slightly in his favor. All he wanted was to finish here and head back to his place for a cold shower and an even colder beer. It would just fucking figure that the universe had other ideas. He glanced up, but Aubrey Kaiser hadn't moved. In fact, with her arms crossed over her chest and her chin up, all signs pointed to this adding up to an argument he couldn't possibly win. Damn it. No. She frowned harder. It's your birthday. You can't just sit at home by yourself. Since it's my birthday, this is the one day a year I should be able to do exactly that with no one bitching at me. He regretted the harsh words almost as soon as they were out of his mouth. But Aubrey wasn't like his little cousin. She was meaner than a rattler, and twice as likely to bite. She narrowed her amber eyes at him. Your cousin misses you. That explained why she was out here when he knew for a fact she thought horses were akin to goats, as in the devil's own creatures. Hell, she was giving poor Rita a suspicious look, even while guilt-tripping him using the one person in his life he couldn't say no to. Which doesn't explain why Jules herself isn't here. She sees me on a regular basis. This is your birthday. Aubrey sighed and rolled her eyes, looking put upon. Look, it goes like this. Jules has worked really hard to put together a surprise birthday party for you, and if you don't show up to be surprised, she's going to be crushed. He stared. I don't want a surprise birthday party. The fact that it was no longer a surprise said a whole lot about Aubrey's priorities, and he couldn't blame her for that. Look at my face. This is the face of a woman who doesn't give two fucks what you care about. What I care about is Jules, and that means you're going to go shower off the smell of that animal and show up at their house in an hour. Right on time. She paused, her brows slanting down in an expression that was downright forbidding. You helped me out not too long ago, so I'm going to do you a solid and give you the lowdown. Ready? Fuck no. Sure. Jules is worried about you. Really worried. If you don't show up tonight, she's going to take that as a sign to go forward with Plan B. He knew he was going to regret it, but he still asked, What's Plan B? Aubrey gave a tight smile. A full-scale intervention with everyone in your life, including your parents. The kind where they sit you down in a circle and each speak their mind in the most uncomfortable way possible until you're ready to beg the ground to swallow you whole. Her smile dimmed. She's worried about you, Daniel. Everyone seemed worried about him, though they usually did him the courtesy of at least trying to hide the looks exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking. The whispered conversations with his various cousins and his parents. The never-ending work that was only there because they were throwing him a goddamn bone. It didn't seem to matter that he hadn't done anything requiring an intervention. He'd just stopped enjoying the company of people, mostly because he was such shitty company these days. But tried telling that to the family, and they acted like he had just confessed to being an axe murderer. At least Jules had mostly stayed out of it, up until today. He grabbed the curry brush and went over Rita's back. Aubrey was right. Showing up to a party he didn't want on a day he sure as fuck didn't feel like celebrating was vastly preferable to the alternative. "Explain to me what the plan is." She gave him a grin that did nothing to reassure him. "Dinner and drinks. It'll be nice. Adam and Quinn miss you. I see those assholes every day." Kind of hard not to when they worked the ranch alongside him. It felt right to have Adam back, to have Quinn there, but at the same time it was a constant reminder that they were a man short. And it was his fault. "It's different and you know it," Aubrey continued, obviously enjoying how miserable he was. She'd always been a mean one, which never failed to amuse him, because Jules was her polar opposite, as bright and happy as a spring day. Rita shifted in her stall, and Aubrey went even paler than she was normally. "Dinner starts at 6. Don't be late." Then she was gone, moving at a clip fast enough that a less cautious man than Daniel would call it running. He waited a good 5 minutes before he followed, hauling the saddle into the tack room and sorting out the bridle. He didn't begrudge Quinn his happiness, or Adam for that matter, but sometimes it sure as fuck was hard to be around them and their women. The fact that one of those women was his little cousin barely entered into it. He headed for his truck and took the pitted dirt road leading around the edge of his parents' property to the little house he'd built a few years ago. It wasn't anything fancy, but it got the job done, and it was far enough outside town that most people thought twice before stopping by unannounced. Most people, not including his family. The shower did nothing to ward off the feeling of pending doom. It wasn't that he didn't like Jules or Adam or Quinn or whoever the fuck else was going to be at this damn party, but he wasn't in the partying sort of mood. Truth be told, he hadn't been in that mood for over a decade. It was almost enough to make him call the whole thing off, but the knowledge that Jules would have no problem bringing the party to him got him moving again. Not to mention the potential intervention he needed, like he needed a hole in the head. At least if he went there, he could hang out for the appropriate amount of time, make his excuses, and slip out while everyone else was occupied. 2 hours tops. Feeling significantly better, he pulled on a pair of his favorite old jeans and a t-shirt and grabbed his keys. It struck him as he walked out the door that he was 34 years old. How the hell did that happen? He shook his head. He knew damn well how that happened. One day turned into a week, a month, a year, a decade. All while he kept on keeping, the world changing around him, but never changing enough. He glanced at his watch. 2 hours starts when I get there. Chapter 2. Daniel figured out the entire party was a mistake 10 minutes in, which was right around the time Adam and Quinn walked in the back door with a motherfucking puppy. He shook his head, backing away. No. It was this or that little hellion Mr. Winkles. Thinking of that asshole cat who currently resided in Jules's cat cafe, Daniel cringed. Then he made the mistake of looking at the dog in Quinn's arms. The big man dwarfed the tiny pup, which had to contribute to how cute the little fella was. He was a border collie and had big blue eyes and a patchy fur coloring that was black, brown, and white. His left ear flopped down, and if he wasn't the cutest little thing... God damn it. I don't want a dog. His heart wasn't really in the protest, though, so when Quinn offered the pup, Daniel took him. The pup immediately scrambled up against him and licked his chin. Though he's cute. That startled a laugh out of him. The last thing I need in my life is a woman, and both you assholes damn well know it. Adam got a funny look on his face, one Daniel would have called guilty. Yeah, well, about that. Brace yourself. He didn't get a chance to ask what the fuck his friend meant by that, because the front door opened behind him and Jules's voice rang out, "Honey, I'm home." "Hey, sugar." But Adam's voice wasn't quite right, and he was looking over Daniel's right shoulder when Jules was clearly behind his left. For one eternal moment, Daniel considered shouldering past his friends and walking out the back door. Whatever put that look on Quinn and Adam's faces wasn't something he wanted to deal with. They almost looked like they'd seen a ghost. But his dad hadn't raised a coward, so he took a deep breath and turned around. And froze. She looks the same. He blinked, but Hope Moore didn't disappear. She just stood in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in an effortless ponytail, her face older than when he'd last seen her, but more beautiful for the years written across it. Her body had filled out, her hips and breasts curvier than they'd been at 18. She didn't look like a girl anymore. No, Hope was a full woman. And then, because he couldn't help it, his gaze dropped to her left leg. Her skirt was too long to see the scar he knew must wind down her leg, the scar he'd put there. Knee replacements weren't pretty, and her bones had already been mangled by the time she made it to the hospital, her entire future ruined in the space of a single heartbeat. Because of him. She flinched, which was answer enough. He hadn't imagined it, and the handful of surgeries, the months and months of recovery, the loss of her cross-country scholarship, all of it had really happened to her. What's the ability to run compared to a brother? You fucked everything up beyond recognition. He dragged his attention back to her face, determined not to look at her leg again. He'd been the one responsible. The least he could do was avoid making her feel uncomfortable. She recovered quickly, offering him a small, sad smile. "Hey, Daniel, what are you doing here?" It came out too harsh, but he didn't take the words back. 13 goddamn years, and she chose today to show up in Devil's Falls? It wasn't a coincidence, and he had a feeling he knew whom to blame. He spun and pointed a finger at Quinn, keeping his hold on the pup gentle, despite his growing anger. "You. What the fuck did you do?" He knew Quinn had seen Hope last month at his sister's wedding, which meant he'd opened his idiot mouth and said something to bring her home. You should be thanking him. Fuck that. She doesn't want to be here. If she did, she would have come back before now. Quinn held up his hands. "Don't look at me. This isn't my style, and you know it." He had a point. Both his friends were more direct than to pull some shit like this. Jules, though. Daniel turned to glare at her. "This is out of line. Even for you." For her part, she didn't look the least bit repentant. She propped her hands on her hips. "Fun fact, Hope is a grown woman who's more than capable of making her own decisions. She wandered into my shop, and I was polite enough to invite her along. I didn't kidnap her." She motioned at Hope. "Tell him I didn't kidnap you." Despite everything going on around them, Hope burst out laughing. Daniel's chest gave a lurch. Fuck. The woman's laugh could still do a number on him. All these years later, she should have sounded different from the innocent girl he'd been head over heels in love with. Too much had changed for her to still love life as much as she had back then. Hadn't it? Hope shook her head, still laughing. I can attest that I drove into town of my own free will. I take no responsibility for what happened after that cup of coffee. Jules is a hard woman to say no to. She pinned him in place with those dark eyes. Happy birthday, Danny. No one had called him that well, hell, in 13 years. Hearing it on her lips nearly had him crossing the room to her and seeing what else was the same. Common sense stopped him cold. Whatever had brought Hope back into town, she wasn't here for him. There was no forgiving what he'd done, and he'd be worse than a fool to forget that. It took everything he had to dredge up a half-hearted smile. Thanks. The pup wiggled in his arms and gave a mournful whine. He took the excuse to get the hell out of there. Be back in a bit. He had no intention of coming back. Forget worrying about being cowardly. The last thing he wanted to do was stand in a room with Hope Moore and make small talk. As much as the sight of her was like a rain after a long drought, there was too much shit between them. She should have stayed away. Whatever brought her back here, it could have been avoided. He set the pup down in the yard and crouched next to her, watching her run back and forth, still in the awkward stage, where her paws seemed too big for her body. She really was a cutie. She was also going to need a name. How about Ollie? I like it. He turned to find Hope standing behind him. Again. You sure move quiet when you want to. Especially for a woman with a bum leg. Not that he could say as much without sounding like a jackass. You mean since I had my knee replaced? Of course, she knew what he meant anyway. Apparently, damn near reading his mind was one annoying habit she hadn't outgrown. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She leveraged herself down next to him, the move not quite as smooth as it had been when she was 18. Daniel almost cursed. He had to stop doing that. Comparing her now to how she was then wasn't fair to either of them. It was another lifetime completely, and thinking about it was just fucking depressing. Hope, are you seeing anyone? No? Why not? He was so surprised by the question that he answered honestly. Why the fuck would I bother? Oh, I don't know. Because you don't want to be a creepy old man who lives in the middle of nowhere and has to run off silly high school kids with his shotgun because they tell ghost stories about him? He looked at her, half sure that she was the one who'd lost her damn mind. That's not a thing. It is most definitely a thing. She leaned back on her hands and stared at the sky. The move arched her back and pressed her breasts against the fancy tank top she wore. It was made of some kind of drapey fabric that looked soft and shiny, and it highlighted the fact that he seriously doubted she was wearing a bra. You're too young to just give up. It's not about giving up. Though he didn't expect Hope to understand that. He'd checked up on her a few times since the accident, and every single time he was amazed at the things she'd accomplished. Life had kicked her in the teeth, and she'd come back swinging. She'd taken 2 years off, and then attended the University of Texas and graduated with honors. She ran her own successful consulting business to work with companies that wanted to set up scholarships and nonprofits. She shifted to look at him. It looks like giving up from where I'm sitting. She continued before he could respond, not that he knew what the fuck he was supposed to say to that. Are you happy? What the hell kind of question was that? I'm getting by. That pretty much answers that. She gave him a bittersweet smile. I should have come back before now to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?